Hey everybody, it's your buddy Beard Grizzly, and I wanted to start a series I've been thinking of for a while now. Let me explain the overall goals, since this is a different route than I've taken before. First, I want to highlight some stories I may be running out of time, air quotes, to cover, as well as give you guys some examples of stories that might be time sensitive to read on your own, or look up when you get some time on your own. Second, it's meant to see where your interests lie. If you have a story that pops up that I do explain, that I talk about here, that you'd like to see covered in more detail, then speak up. Tell me. Most times I consider a lot of these tales as older stories and ones that have kind of been beat to death. I can't always tell what it is that is and isn't current or what you guys would be interested in, so for me, top 3s are just a really good way to help you guys out with the stories that you might be missing along your adventures in the lore of Destiny. Anyway, those are a couple reasons for a series like this, so without further ado, let's get into my top 3 stories to prepare you for Forsaken before the expansion is released. Most of these tales are worth reading for genuine universe building, especially with recent events, but some of them go further than you might expect. Number 3 is something that's been teased at for a little while now, and something that has especially popped up thanks to the Whisper of the Worm mission and lore. Don't worry, I want to cover that at some point along with all 12 pages of my written notes, which will be soon. I keep saying that, but just want to reiterate, I haven't forgotten, it's just a time problem. Literally. Anyway, number 3 is the Crota Fireteam. The story of the first Crota Fireteam is an important one to highlight, especially with some of the Hive involvements within our system, especially that of Crota, the first son of Oryx that we encounter. But it's more about who is on the team that matters more. Toland, the Shattered. There's been some teasings that have been around the spoiler realm of this warlock, and I don't know how relevant he will be, but it is worth bringing him up again. As it stands, his voice actor was used within the Voidwalker subclass quest for warlocks, and this gives us some great indications that he may be back in one form or another, possibly with his journal, or maybe more as a guide. I think that's all I'll say on this for now on the matter, but for the Crota Fireteam itself, this gives you the acknowledgement of Toland's past deeds, being that most of what we know of this old warlock lies in grimoire cards. I'd suggest looking into them if you're able. As the list stands, Ishtar Collective has an 11-card listing that exists of this fire team, but it goes a bit past that. The card, Rise of Crota, goes over Eris Morn's collection of this fire team and how they formed, especially their ultimate end goal. The City Age card speaks on the madness of Toland as a main remark, and so we have to question just how far that really went. And then, finally, 2 cards that sum up that Toland may not be so dead and buried. Court of Oryx and King's Fall talk us through some possible musings of Toland's departed self as he slips through the Ascendant Realm or tithing network of the Hive. We're unsure exactly, but it could be an indication that he still does exist in one way or another. Toland never was entirely there. Still, my reasoning for this being number 3 is twofold. Eris Morn may be just as important. Bungie is catering the next expansion to mean something very Fallen related, but with the Whisper of the Worm quest and the reveal of Zol and the Worm God gear, there's something else just not quite right here. That's why I feel this tale deserves a top 3 mention. Especially too if we think back to how the Taken King went, there were a lot of side missions that talked about the Fallen and also looked into the Vex a little bit as well, so there's possibility that we will still see some of these other larger species that we've been fighting against brought up again. And Lord knows the Cabal still have a presence and so on, so I doubt that this Fallen themed expansion of Forsaken is going to just be about the Fallen. Moving on to number 2 is the entirety of House of Wolves. The expansion itself gives us an idea into the thoughts of the Reef-born Awoken, as well as the Fallen and how truly splintered they are. It gives us some ties to the Fallen being able to utilize Vex tech for their own personal gains, but it goes even further than that. House Wolves was the largest house of the Fallen, but it was quickly broken down thanks to the Reef Wars. More on that in a bit. House Devils overtook this position as the largest house after the wars were over, but the Wolves still posed a bit of a threat, and at least, especially if the Queen of the Awoken, Marasov, willed it. House Wolves also gives us that final key to really seeing most of the houses that still are a major issue for us out in the solar system. I'm anxious to see what else may happen, especially with the other houses that may not be so willing to follow Uldren into the shattered asteroid belt of the Tangled Shore. Still, there are a lot of disconnected cards and references that I want to point out with this period of time to ensure they are also looked into for the House of Wolves. There are several cards discussing a very important feature of the Reef, and that is the Prison of Elders. With all of the members that exist within, it can be an easily overlooked aspect of the House of Wolves. We all know the meme of Psylocke the Defiled, but do you know the importance of it? He is a Taken that seems to be able to shock into the Awoken's mind and erase memories that exist even as far back as a few minutes. These are just points to show the kind of power that the Awoken are further with what the Teshiuns and Variks may have been poking at. Some of my further points here, however, get into number one on my list, however, and these all do tie together, I think, pretty well. Still, before I get to number one, I wanted to highlight a couple runners-up. There are just so many different stories that could actually tie back to Forsaken, and it is really hard to just choose three, so just briefly, here are a couple more. The first is of Ulantan, since his name is showcased more and more and more every expansion. Regardless of what we might be seeing from the newer prophetics of our time, and as Osiris was largely talked about as the main focus within the game lately, Ulantan continues to resurface as a thinker worth looking into. If you want some overviews on him, I did come out with a Guardian School topic on Ulantan some months ago. You can reference this if you'd like to for at least a basis on the Warlock Thinker. There's definitely more behind him than just this episode, however. My second runner-up is on the Maraid. The Maraid ties in with the House of Wolves rather well, but it gives older information. This book and its contents give you some excellent backstory into what the House of Wolves was really after and how some of the battles of the Reef went down. If you want to know the order of how the Maraid can be read, you'll be able to find that in the description below, along with all the other cards and reference links that I've brought up here today. I want to make it easy for you guys to reference the stories I've given you today, not just send you on your way and have you look over Ishtar or otherwise. You could do that on your own whenever you'd like to. And so, to round out my top three, my number one story to look into is the Reef itself, kind of anticlimactically. The Queen of the Awoken, Marasov, the Prince of the Awoken, Uldrensov, Master of Crows, Variks the Loyal, the last of House Judgment, and finally, the one-eyed mystery of Petravenge, Regent Lord of the Reef in the Queen's absence. These four, along with their constituents, are important to know of as we move into this major Fallen update. Each of them have a category on Ishtar Collective, but as you go into reading over these cards and their story, I want to give some extra perspective, at least of my own, to possibly help you guys out. With Forsaken, we see that Uldren is acting out on what he may have been hinting at this entire time, where he wants to take over the Reef, or even further, out to the solar system, and possibly even further than that. These little hints have been dropped in a lot of ways throughout the Grimoire cards, and very little, sadly, within the story itself. A couple major highlights revolve around the House of Wolves cards for the two Barons of Paskin and Vekis. These two King Barons are important to how we start to see that Uldren is looking into these scouting reports that he's been receiving, or just personal information that he's gathering. The House of Kings, another major fallen house, were very seldom seen outside the Cosmodrome. Even then, there are those cards that follow up to the events of the Taken King, and these are the ones that are worth reading for the sake of understanding Uldren's internal workings. The Aftermath card is one of the best to see that Uldren arrives on Mars after the battle with Oryx in space around Saturn. There are also 2 Telesto cards now, one that showcases the Reef is looking for Uldren and the Queen, or really anyone that may have survived the attack by Oryx, and the second in Destiny 2, showing all of the new issues that the Reef is fighting against, including their own leadership. There's also a hidden message amongst the second card, and I hope I can uncover this little mystery for you guys before Forsaken is launched. Yes, I know what the message says, but it's still fun to see if you can figure out what the message says on your own. The last card to reference is Reef 4, where we see that Uldren is being taken to, or at least we assume this with alliteration being used in the card, the House of Kings. This plays into how we may have been scouting, or how he may have been scouting for information on his own about them. Additionally, if you're looking for any summations of some of these extra records, I did just come out with an Uldren's guide not too long ago, so as a profile dossier, this is another one that you can take a look into. For me, there are plenty of other tales that are worth scouting through the Grimoire, flavor text, and other major quests and quest text for, but these 3, plus the other supplemental readings, will keep you busy for at least a bit before Forsaken is launched. That said, I'll go back to my original reasonings for a top 3 series. Are there any of these stories that you'd like me to cover in more detail? Perhaps there's ones you've forgotten about and the reminder was a good thing to think on. Let me know in those comments below, and I'll see what I can do. We're coming down to the wire here with less than a month before Forsaken is released, and I don't know how much time I'm going to have to cover a lot of side stories, so another reason for some of these top 3s, just to make it easy on you guys. As a whole, what do you guys think of my first foray into the top 3 realm? Do you enjoy these kind of videos at all, or would you rather I just cover the same typical topics like we have been? For me, as a creator, I like to try different things to kind of begin with, and this is just another way for me to do so, to reach out to you guys in another way and highlight different tales and stories that I enjoy and think are relevant. Still, would love to hear your thoughts on the format as a whole. But before I keep rambling, thank you for watching. And to Guardians and non-Guardians alike, I'll see you next space time. Take care.